What's going on, Spurs Mafia? I am joined by Karl Schoening. I'm saying that right, right?
Yep, Karl Schoening. Yep.
Karl Schoening. Um, Karl, you have a rare distinction. You have been to far more Austin Spurs games than me. So really excited to talk to you, get your thoughts on the summer league team through two games. You're in the team. You're in Utah with the team. What have been some of your main takeaways so far from these first two games?
Definitely impressed with Kendall Johnson. He's just been a big contributor in both the first two games, and he obviously had that 29-point performance yesterday. I'll be interested to see if he plays today, but overall, just really enjoyed so far how he's been playing. He's a hound defensively, and he can score efficiently. And that's one of the keys in the Spurs system. Can you score efficiently? And he showed it both ways in the first two games, where he can be a shooter and he can also just be someone who's aggressive going to the rim. And I was really impressed with his shot in yesterday's game. It seems like he's lost a little bit of that inefficient motion that you saw at Kentucky. And even with that inefficient motion, he was shooting 38% from three. So I really enjoyed watching his development over these last couple games, in the first couple games as a professional for him.
Genius front officing by the Spurs to trade Kawhi to get Keldon Johnson. Really smart move on their part. I'm kind of kidding, but I mean, in the pre-draft process, he had said, Kawhi Leonard was one of his guys that he looked up to in terms of his approach to the game, and you kind of see, early career Kawhi in the way he plays without the ball. He's a pure finisher. I think on the broadcast last night, on the TV broadcast, they said he had 15 possessions as the pick and roll ball handler in college, 9 ISOs and 6 post ups. He's going to be. Last night he had 29 points. 8 of his 10 baskets he didn't dribble at all. He took 4 total dribbles before his 29 points. His shot prep is great. I love the way he spaces the floor, knows where to be, knows where to cut. He's a prototypical 3-and-D guy, but he's also a little bit more versatile. He can put the ball on the floor, and it seems like he has a really good idea of what to do with the ball before he gets it, right?
Yeah, it's funny. You bring up a Kawhi Leonard comparison. That's fine. But I think one of the other things that I heard yesterday, that Thomas Robinson, who I'll definitely concede basketball knowledge to him, he called him Baby Russ. And I kind of see that. He's very aggressive on the rebounds. He likes to push the break. He can do a lot with the ball. And it's just he has a very high motor. He has a good nose for the ball, so he can force some steals. He stays right on his defender, but if he sees a loose ball, he wants to go after it and then immediately spark a break the other way. So I really do kind of like his motor a lot. He has a nice 6'10 wingspan, good 6'6 frame. He's already around 213. In Calipari's system, he played a lot of small ball 4, but yeah, he knows how to score efficiently, like you were saying, very few dribbles. He doesn't waste time with it. And he doesn't need ISO plays, which is definitely something that will fit well within where you project him to be when he steps into the Spurs rotation, because the Spurs aren't going to give any kind of rookie 7 or 8 seconds on a shot clock to do his own thing. So I really think that overall, Keldon Johnson has a good, I almost think I called him at one point a Danny Green starter kit. I think he can potentially be that kind of 50 steals, 50 block kind of player and go out and defend a 1 through 3 for the Spurs. So obviously still only 19, but I was looking at it since John Calipari took over at Kentucky. You don't see SEC Freshman of the Year fall all the way to 29. So that was a great steal for the Spurs, a really good draft haul for the Spurs. If you were to say that with the 19th and 29th pick, the Spurs were going to get Luka Šamanić and Keldon Johnson, I would have said pretty good haul. Like it wouldn't really matter to me where they were taken. Maybe it matters to them a little bit, but as individuals. But at the end of the day, they come into a situation where the Spurs are a veteran-heavy team that know how to develop their young guys the right way, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't get a shot it cracking the rotation right away. There's that good month where the Austin Spurs won't start until November, and in October and September during training camp, the young guys get a chance to prove what they can do. And you never know, if they catch fire a little early, they could go ahead and maybe stay up in San Antonio. But typically the way it goes is they stay in Austin and get a chance to develop within the Spurs system there. And as we've seen with DeJounte Murray, Bryn Forbes, Derek White, that just does wonders for their confidence, for how they fit and play in the system. Much better to get your mistakes out in the G League and get some film that you can go ahead and look into, and then go ahead and develop that way, as opposed to just getting practice minutes and being at the end of the bench. I'm sure the Spurs are very happy with how the G League has become a much better league, and the Summer League is basically an entry into the G League. You're going to see a lot of them really develop right now. Like, their development starts right now as they're getting professional coaching, and they're getting to go up against hungry professional players. Everybody out there is playing for a roster spot, a training camp invite, maybe cracking the rotation for their team if they've been around for a while. So the Summer League, always fun, mainly because of how hungry these guys are and eager to prove what they can do at the professional level.
All of these guys look really hungry. You touched on transition, and I just wanted to expand on that a little bit, because if you look at the last 5 first-round draft picks, you got DeJounte Murray, Derek White, Lonnie Walker, Luka Šamanić, and Keldon Johnson. In addition to being just a fun lineup on its own, all of those guys are good, versatile defenders. All of those guys love to run in transition. Do you think it's fair to say that the people who don't expect the Spurs to, make the playoffs, continue to do well, do you think those people just really aren't paying attention to what the Spurs have been building over the last few years?
It's always an interesting thing, and you see it every year with any fan base, where if you're not a contender, you should tank. And that's just poor faith in your front office and coaching, in my opinion, because obviously, okay, you tank and you don't get Zion Williamson, you maybe get the 4th or 5th overall pick, or the 7th, and those might not be franchise guys. And then on top of that, how long were teams like the Orlando Magic sputtering in the lottery? And there's obviously things where I think that that's more of a knee-jerk fan reaction, and some of these professionals who go ahead and count the Spurs out every year might be along the lines of, the West is always so stacked, and you look at the Spurs on paper, and yeah, it's a lot of guys that are drafted in later rounds, but Greg Popovich is just a tremendous developer of talent. Chip England is the Spurs' secret weapon, in my opinion. He teaches them how to shoot at the professional level. And obviously, the coaching staffs, even though there's been a lot of turnover because Spurs assistants are in high demand, Pop does a great job developing assistant coaches as well. So it's very much the Spurs get overlooked maybe because they aren't getting these high draft picks, but you can even look at any of their draft picks over the last 30 years, since Tim Duncan pretty much, and they've done a good job of developing these guys, working them in, rebuilding on the fly. Not many teams do what the Spurs did, in the sense of, since 1999, had a championship. Basically only the coach and the star player were on the roster when they won the next championship, and they didn't even miss a beat. They never lost 50 games. They won 50 games every year. So you can count the Spurs out, whatever. They don't pay attention to it.
I don't think the Spurs really mind when people overlook them, because then they just fly under the radar, catch everybody by surprise when it matters most. I did want to ask you about Lonnie Walker. We sat next to each other for a lot of Lonnie Walker games last year. What do you think the biggest area of improvement for him has been since last season, which was only a couple months ago? And what do you think is the biggest thing that he needs to work on if he wants to make meaningful contributions in the NBA this year?
I think the main thing that Lonnie definitely improved on, at least that I saw in that first game, the only game that he's done in Summer League, is that he didn't need to be on a roll to keep playing well. There was a stretch where he had a couple bad plays and a slow start, but then he had a couple good plays. And the way just the summer league flow worked, he didn't want to just take over the game. So he went ahead and stepped back and let other players do their thing. And that kind of took away a little of his momentum a little bit later when he tried to get back into it. And he didn't get down on that. And it's easy for 19, 20-year-olds to maybe fall into a downward spiral if they go down just a little bit. But he definitely, he knew that he needed to be the veteran and show that the fourth quarter was his time, and scored 8 points in the fourth quarter and really scored 6 of those in like a 3-minute span where he had a finger roll and then a couple nice mid-range jumpers. And he's definitely somebody who I think that'll be the next step, just doing that at the NBA level, where if the very stacked backcourt of the Spurs goes ahead and has the ball majority in the hands of Derek White or DeJounte Murray, Lonnie Walker will come out, and when he's asked to make a play, he'll be able to make a play, as opposed to he made a good play, he needs the ball again to keep up that momentum. So that's kind of thing, the consistency of solid play, because there were times in the G League where if he wasn't the focal point, he didn't necessarily make an impact, but then when he became the focal point, he made an impact. And it's just stringing together that confidence. And at the NBA level, that'll be the thing, because already he's very high good instinct player, defender, 7-foot wingspan almost, 6'5", has a frame to guard 1 through 3, honestly, and he could potentially be the best athlete on the Spurs. So, and everybody liked to call the Spurs old and boring back in the early 2000s. This is not your Tim Duncan Spurs where you slowed it down and get the ball to the low post and work some cuts and some screens to free up shooters, or let Tim just go ahead and go to the post. These are really athletic guys that'll be able to push the break, and we'll see some highlights next year. I'm really excited for this young group of guys for the Spurs. They've done a tremendous job, as usual, drafting.
Yep, absolutely. And, the development team, Lonnie shouted out Chip England, Will Hardy, the entire development staff, credited them with pushing him, keeping him engaged, and helping him grow his game. It's really good to see that. I did want to ask you about Luka Šamanić, 19th pick in this draft. It took me like 45 minutes of watching tape after they picked him to fall in love with the pick. I was not in love with it immediately, came around pretty quickly. He's still definitely a little rough around the edges. He needs to work on his shot. He needs to put on some muscle. And deal with contact better. What have you seen from him in terms of his potential, and also the things that he needs to really work on to get onto that San Antonio bench and start making an impact?
Well, he's only 19 years old, so it's one of those things where you have to I think I understand what you mean in terms of, I like what he brings in to the table in terms of his mold. He's a legit 6'11". I was standing next to him, and I was raising my camera up pretty good to get a good angle at his face. And he speaks pretty good English for a Croatian 19-year-old. He's a little soft-spoken, but that's to be expected. Again, he's 19. So it just takes seasoning for these guys. And we've kind of, in the 21st century, lost the building of a track record, because it used to be back in the 90s where we would take 22-year-olds who are a lot more mature and have developed into their bodies a little bit more. Here, you're right. He will, as most 19-year-olds that aren't Zion Williamson, needs to develop some muscle and some size, and he has a great frame for that. And honestly, you just get him down with professional nutritionists such as the Spurs training staff, and along the lines of just knowing how to get into a weight room and making it your full-time job. It's definitely a situation where, yeah, maybe he needs a year to really be the NBA player that you want him to be, but just be patient with these guys. Too often do we go ahead and say, man, that guy's a bust, or anything like that 6 months into their careers. You got to give kids and players time to develop and really step in. But overall, he has a good feel for the game. He's very aggressive. He can put the ball on the floor a little. He is a little thin, but he will post up on smaller defenders, and his shot is actually really beautiful at the moment. Like I've been like 5 feet away from him, and I'm just like, that's a stroke. Like that's going in, and it's a good stroke, and he's gonna probably go ahead and take that to the next level. He's already hitting NBA threes with confidence. And I think he has really good feel on the defensive end. He's had a few good blocks these last couple of games. So is he another Austin Spur? Potentially. But at the same time, that's just almost to be expected because the Spurs develop their guys right. And I always trust the Spurs. If they want to go ahead and say he's an NBA player right now and put him in their rotation, they know a lot more about basketball than I do. But if they want to go ahead and just follow suit with the history of it, the G League will be a place where I think he'll flourish.
When they had picks 19 and 29, they definitely needed to address the depth on the wing. And my thinking was they should go highest ceiling at 19, lowest floor at 29. And I didn't realize at the time, but they did that. And Šamanić definitely looks like a bit more of a project than Keldon. I think just because of the way Keldon plays and the way he played at Kentucky, you see it all the time. Guys that have extremely high usage rates in college, and then they get to the next level and they're not the number one guy or even the number 5 guy, and they have to completely adjust what they're doing on the court to fit what the team needs. Keldon Johnson has an NBA ready skill set, especially with the personnel that the Spurs have, ball dominant players like you said, like DeJounte Murray, like Derek White. But I can see Luka Šamanić in a year's time with a little bit more muscle and a little bit better feel for how to use that big frame. There were a couple times last night where he took an extra dribble and cost himself space with a defender. Couple little things like that, using his 2 steps. Once he figures that out, he's going to be a monster. And you brought up his defense. He has said he can switch 1 through 5, and he's kind of doing it. I mean, he's definitely going to struggle a little bit with foot speed with the smaller guys, but he has the length to recover. So yeah, I'm with you. I think the Spurs did an excellent job drafting. And let's just touch on the last Spurs draftee, Quinndary Weatherspoon, who is on this team. Didn't play last night, but he hit that third quarter buzzer beater in the first game, and he looked really sharp to me. He was a 4-year player at Mississippi State. He looks seasoned, and when he's out there playing in the summer league, he looks like one of the most experienced guys out there. What are you seeing from his game?
Yeah, well, he was first team All SEC, I think the last 2 years, honestly, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely this past year. And the SEC is a basketball conference that produces NBA players every year. Doesn't matter whether it's from Florida or Kentucky or Texas A&M. There are good basketball players at that level. And when an All SEC first team player that's pretty good size for his position falls to 20 or 49, yeah, like that's something worth noting. Who cares? Like, again, the Spurs aren't particularly of the thought process, we need to get these guys when they're 19 or 20 years old so we can develop them our way. I don't know his age off the top of my head, but like, it's not uncommon for seniors to come in and be successful in the NBA. And I'm sure the Spurs probably were looking at him as a guy who can compete right now at a professional level. And maybe he needs to develop in the G League a bit himself, and maybe the Spurs are a little bit crowded in the backcourt. But at 49, I think you go with best available. And he definitely looks like a guy who was a good pick at 49. Who knows? Maybe they had him on their big board somewhere in the mid 30s, or perhaps even somewhere in the first round. You never know. So one of those things where, do you really care if he's a couple years older than the other guys? Not really, because you like what you see from somebody, and they're someone that you want to take. And I think he looked really good in his first game. He looked like he was playing back in the SEC. So if he's somebody that pans out, everybody's going to be like, oh, wow, that's another Spurs pick. So I think that he's definitely somebody that will we'll be hearing from more in the future, whether it's in Austin or San Antonio. He looks to be a pretty well-seasoned, good feel for the game guard.
And now I just want to ask you, a lot of people have asked me to ask you this. Who other than Lonnie Walker and those 3 draft picks is popping off the court to you? Who's impressing you? Who is, showing you a little something that they hadn't shown before?
I wouldn't necessarily say he's showing something he hasn't shown before, but I really do think that Thomas Robinson is one of these guys who, if he has a good summer league, maybe not with the Spurs, but he could transition back into the NBA. He was, I think, 4th overall to Sacramento, which is coming up on like the 2012 draft, roughly around that time, 2013 draft, maybe. I didn't do much research into Thomas Robinson, but he's definitely someone who's a seasoned vet out there. And those kind of things are good for young developing guys to be around, because even like I said earlier in this interview, he called Keldon Johnson Baby Russ. And just compliments like that from people who have gone up against Russell Westbrook in their careers are definitely things that these young guys like to hear. And you never know, maybe it's one of those things where you have this, I think he's 28, 29. He's still underneath 30. And you have a guy who's hungry to make the league. And it's a good example of this guy was a top draft pick, and he's still going hard to make his dream come true. And there's stories like that I think he helps the Spurs on the court, and I think he really helps the Spurs off of the court. So Thomas Robinson would probably be the answer to the non-Spurs draft picks who I've been enjoying watching play. And he had a nice alley-oop at the end of the game yesterday too. So it's good to see that athleticism is still there.
It's really interesting. I mean, we spend a lot of time covering the Austin Spurs, the G League, and just the kind of players that come through. Everyone from new 19-year-old millionaires to journeymen, guys who are just trying to get a shot somewhere. It's inspiring to be around, honestly, because all of these guys are working to improve their standing wherever it may be. Ben Moore has been kind of popping to me. I don't remember him playing with this much intensity last year. Am I just off on that? Was I locked in on Lonnie too much, or has he kicked it up a notch?
Potentially, I could say that. I think he's always been a really good defender. I think Ben Moore has always been somebody who's been a good rebounder, and you talk about it every year. There is a new athletic 6'7" to 6'9" wing that is a fringe NBA player that comes in, and Ben Moore, who I really do think is close to being an NBA player in terms of just kind of needs opportunities here and there, needs to hit a few shots, and all of a sudden get in the right situation. Who knows where it is, but I really enjoy watching Ben Moore play. He plays with very strong defense. He's a long, athletic guy. And yeah, he definitely has some kick to his game. I really do think that he could guard 1 through 4, depending on who that 4 is. But in the modern NBA, he matches up against most 4s pretty well. Maybe not the speedier like De'Aaron Fox ones, but if it were coming down to where a small ball 4 was in and he was a small ball 4 and here comes a high screen and roll, I wouldn't doubt that he could keep up with him foot speed wise on a switch. So yeah, I enjoy watching Ben Moore. Definitely one of these guys who you get caught up in a numbers game. Every year, new guys come into the league. Every year, somebody else is also improving. So it just comes down to, can you be lucky? A lot of luck goes into this as well. Can you take the best of your opportunities? And I enjoy watching Ben Moore, and his size and athleticism are always appreciated on any basketball court.
I agree. Obviously, it's summer league. Obviously, it's only been 2 games, but this group looks really, really good. They've been dominant through 2 games. When I touch down in Vegas in a week, how much money should I put down on Austin Spurs, 2020 G League champions?
I don't encourage or condone gambling, I suppose. I'm not someone who would go ahead and tell you to put money down on them, but I can tell you a combination of injuries and off-season moves have made the Spurs the best team here in Utah, according to my grading of roster on paper. Because maybe Cleveland would potentially be able to contend with them, but as far as I know, Drawn Blossom Game, Kevin Porter Jr., and Darius Garland are all sitting out Utah Summer League. So there goes your intriguing Cleveland team to basically the Canton Charge. And then also on the other end of it, Utah's made so many offseason moves and trades that I think they have just some second round guys going because they traded the 23rd overall pick in the Mike Conley trade. So obviously they're not playing anybody projected. And then Memphis, I would have loved to have seen John Morant, but he had that offseason, I think, what was it, a knee scope, something along those lines that basically, yeah, I think the recovery timetable was 3 to 4 weeks, but they're not going to push the future of their franchise for some summer league games. So I imagine that the just basic Memphis hustle are out there playing. So it's the Spurs, I think, have the most NBA players on their roster. But again, it goes down to the Spurs probably don't care about winning the summer league or winning championships. They care about what these games mean, scouting these players. But these players definitely care about winning, and they definitely care about showing off how they play as a team. And the Spurs put together a really good roster this year. So I enjoy watching those guys. But it will come down to it's a little bit of a grueling 3 games in 3 days here, and then I don't know how many games, but if they keep winning a lot of games in Vegas, so even if they're in the tournament, you just listen to your sports science guys, and it's like, hey, playing somebody 4 games in 5 days is probably not the best thing. And as much as you want to see them play, that's a big enough sample size to get a feel for them. And plus you have them in practices and mini camps, and if you want to invite them to training camp, you know who they are. And then there's obviously the G League that season that comes up. So yeah, these guys all are getting quality minutes in front of NBA coaches, and they'll be able to be put into the next spot where they need to go.
All right. Well, before we leave it off, any questions you have for me?
Oh, I'm not a particularly curious person. I just kind of see what I see and then go on with life, and next thing's next. So don't die in Vegas. Vegas is kind of wild.
I'll try not to. It's gonna be mostly in the gym for me. I do want to ask you before we go. You do play-by-play, and that has always fascinated me. You know, how does your brain work? How do you do that? I like it seems like it's got to be one of the hardest things to learn how to do.
I get this question all the time, and it's a lot of practice by going out and actually doing it. I've been doing play-by-play for over 10 years now, since I was in high school with my high school, and then I went to Texas State and I did Texas State stuff. And then when I graduated, I started my own broadcasting company. And within that year, I'm now going to be going into my 4th year with the Austin Spurs, doing I split time with who used to be Andrew Monaco, now Dan Weiss and Lincoln Rose. So the way I describe it is, you need fundamental things such as, knowing how to save the time and the score and those kind of things. But it's instead of hand-eye coordination, it's eye-tongue coordination. And you can't really get caught up on, if you make a mistake, oh, I made a mistake, and let that affect the rest of the game. You move on. You're just going to make mistakes. You're going to mispronounce or do things wrong, and you can be mad at yourself after the game. But then I also figured out that in basketball, at least, you just need to know 3 things and then work on how you describe those 3 things. the player's name, the location on the court, the action. And sometimes you can only squeeze in one of those things. Sometimes you can squeeze in all three of those things. Sometimes a combination of the two are fine. And that's what I usually tell beginners. It's like, just focus on those three things. Like, it's like, okay, Keldon Johnson, right wing, shoots a three. You described it perfectly. And that gets in those three things. Or he passes down to the block. And then you just keep going. So I've done a lot of rapping in my car for tongue speed.
I love it. Who are your favorite rappers?
Oh,
I got Bart Gucci Mane over here.
You got to go with Drizzy. I really like Drake a lot. He's kind of just been the voice of my generation growing up. Yeah, there's a German guy named Crow that I listen to because I learned a little German in college. I could probably just go ahead and list a lot of people, but yeah, like those are the main. I'll probably just catch me listening to Drake. I'm all over the place on my music taste too.
I appreciate that. Well, tell the people where they can follow you on social media, what they can subscribe to. I'll put the links all in the description.
Sure. Follow me on Twitter at KSmedia13, and anything that I upload goes to my company's YouTube channel, SHN Sports. So go ahead and subscribe to that. We do a lot of college and high school and semi-pro, high-quality broadcasts. So yeah, you can go ahead and definitely keep an eye on everything going on, mostly Central Texas, but we're even expanding. We just added a North Dakota affiliate. So yeah, we're in talks with some other people around the country, so we'll be coast to coast soon enough. So yeah, it's basically, if you want any kind of broadcast, or if you already have a broadcast, we can either help you get something started, or we can go ahead and improve your broadcast. So yeah, we do a lot with a little, and so can you.
All right, kick ass, man. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm excited to see this last game in Utah. I'm excited to see the videos you post. You've been doing great videos on the post-game interviews and stuff. And till next time, go Spurs, go.
Yeah, go Spurs, go. Talk to you later, Tom.